good. Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. It's nice to see everybody here. Thank you to those that have ventured out tonight, and thank you to those who are watching us online as we webcast this budget meeting. It's nice to welcome you all here. Can I just firstly just ask you to set, if you can put your mobile phones to silent, please, that would be good. And I'll take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting upon this evening and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to firstly acknowledge the councillors that are with us this afternoon. We've got Mayor Ian Tiley, Deputy Mayor Deborah O'Brien, Councillor John Gallatley and Councillor Peter Bailey. Have an apology from Councillor Marat and Councillor O'Connor, and I believe Councillor Robinson is watching us online. So thank you to everybody. And I'd also just acknowledge, while I've got the floor here, my colleagues, staff colleagues, Scott McDonald, Kelly Stidworthy, Mark Byrne and Ben Smith. Welcome everybody. Thanks for, as I said, thank you very much for coming to this presentation this afternoon to hear about Council's draft operational plan for 21-22. As you're aware, we have this document out on public exhibition and it will be so until the 24th of June. It's been a pretty difficult task for us to try and pull all of this together for this year. Planning for this operational plan, the budget began back in just about December 2020 and has been an ongoing effort since then. We've had 5 sessions since March and into early April with the councillors over this period. And Council have had to make some very difficult decisions around what could be afforded and therefore included in the draft operational plan and budget. While the Council is no longer under administration, it remains under a performance improvement order issued by the New South Wales Local Government or Minister for Local Government. The performance improvement order requires Council to achieve an improved financial position from previous years and continue to improve on this. This has proven to be a very difficult task due to the constraints on the level of funding available, some of the negative impacts on revenue that have occurred, and the increases in costs which are often outside Council's control. However, we have managed to table a budget that meets the requirements of the performance improvement order and gives us something to build on into future years. The draft operational plan and budget for the 21-22 financial year was unanimously adopted by the Council at a meeting held on the 26th of May 2021 and therefore reflects their position. In short, I'd say that while the current position of Council, both financially and from a governance perspective, is dire, it is absolutely salvageable. From a budget perspective, this is the first step in setting a responsible and sustainable budget that meets the requirements of the Local Government Act and seeks to lay a foundation from which we can build. Late last year, Council consulted the community on a special rate variation. This was necessary as the temporary SRV was expiring on the 30th of June this year, and Council would have had its revenue reduced by approximately $1.5 million if the SRV was not replaced. Council's been successful in securing the replacement of the SRV on a maintained services basis. What this means is that service levels remain at around the same level in the short term, and we're not proposing to increase or improve services under this budget. We have to continue to deliver services within the current funding envelope that we have, and this is going to get tougher in future years. As a council, we have significant challenges ahead of us and a large infrastructure base to maintain and a relatively low revenue base. Our forecasts show that we're not investing enough money into infrastructure maintenance and assets such as roads and footpaths, buildings which will deteriorate as a result. In future years, we will need to make some tough decisions on how to address this. And on that note, I will hand over to Kelly Stidworthy, our Manager of Financial Services, to take you through the document. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, James, and welcome everyone. We've got a presentation to run through this evening, so what we're planning to do is run through that first, and then there's some time at the end of the meeting for questions or comments. So we estimate presentation will take between 45 minutes to an hour. We'll try and get through it as quickly as we can. And then there's around 30 to 45 minutes at the end for questions, comments, and we're hoping to close the meeting at around 7. So just a bit of background on Armidale Regional Council. It was formed in 2016, along with a number of other new councils merged in New South Wales, following the IPARTS review that found nearly 2/3 of New South Wales councils were not fit for the future. The population of the region is close to 30,000 and the land area is 8,630 square kilometres. The size of the region is larger than many countries in the world. This results in a population density of 3.4 persons per square kilometre, and there are around 13,000 ratepayers. A major challenge for regional councils is the population density. There's not as many people to spread the cost of service over as city areas. Comparing urban and regional areas is like comparing apples and oranges. You need to take a broader look at all the things that councils do and the services they provide. For example, council has an extensive unsealed road network of 1,078 kilometres, and we run 4 grading crews per year at a cost of around $3,300 per crew per day. If you compared us to a city council, they probably wouldn't even own a grader. In 2021-22, we're budgeting for 296 full-time equivalent staff members, and this is the same number of FTEs that the combined councils reported at merger. This slide provides a snapshot of the key services council is responsible for. Apart from a large base of infrastructure to maintain, there's many services that council runs requiring staff and other resources. Most of the services are required to be provided under legislation and some of them generate revenue. It would be impossible to run all of these services at full cost recovery. A good example would be swimming pools. Council's not able to charge user charges and fees to recover the full cost of swimming pools because it would make them very expensive and only a small section of the population could then access them. The majority of council services fall into the category of public goods, including roads, bridges, footpaths, public parks and libraries. Public goods are available to everyone and you cannot exclude anyone from using them. Council must raise rates from the community to cover the cost of public goods, and therefore rates are a tax, they're not a fee for service. Just a bit on council's infrastructure. So we're responsible for the management of infrastructure of around $1 billion. That's the estimated gross replacement cost of infrastructure only. In addition to that, there's a number of other asset classes such as land, which we also manage. Infrastructure assets have long, useful lives and they only exist to provide services to the community. The majority of council's assets cannot be sold to generate funding as they're used to provide services or they're public goods. Assets deteriorate over time. So if you take the example of a road, the vehicles drive over them every day, they're subject to weather, they require grading and pothole patching to maintain them in a satisfactory condition. We refer to that as maintenance. Every so often though, you need to gravel resheet the road or you need to reseal it because maintenance can only do so much. We would call that renewing the road. And eventually you may need to do something different. You may need to make a 1-lane road into a 2-lane road because of traffic. And we would refer to that as an upgrade. An infrastructure backlog occurs when the level of maintenance or renewal is not possible to keep existing assets in satisfactory condition. The backlog is the amount of money that is required to be spent to bring council's assets up to a satisfactory standard. If the backlog increases, it will cost more in the long run to do this. Council does not currently generate a sufficient level of funding to maintain and renew all assets under its control to a satisfactory condition. The inability to source appropriate levels of funding for effective infrastructure renewal and replacement is one of the most critical issues facing local government in Australia. Rates represent 3.6% of all government taxes, but local government is responsible for about 25% of all non-financial assets held by all spheres of government. With infrastructure assets being such long-lived assets, up to 100 years, this issue is not a short-term issue that can be quickly fixed. It requires a long-term strategy to manage appropriately. This slide provides a snapshot of Council's key responsibilities under the Local Government Act. So first and foremost, we're required to facilitate the role as required under the Act. And so one of Council's primary responsibilities is to facilitate the collection, management and spending of public funding on community services. The Act requires Council to carry out functions in a way that facilitates a local community that is strong, healthy and prosperous. To achieve this, some of the functions we're required to carry out under the Act are apply the principles of sound financial management, prepare forward plans, advocate on behalf of the community, act as a planning and regulatory authority, act as a water supply authority, act as a roads authority, manage public land, and provide waste services. This is a fairly vast range of legislative responsibilities, but it actually doesn't cover everything that we do. In some areas, councils don't manage water or sewage, or even waste, but in regional areas, councils are generally required to do all these things. It's fair to say that local government's responsibilities are constantly expanding without increased funding, and there's a continuous shift from state government to local government. An example is Crown land, where councils now have full responsibility to maintain Crown reserves and are expected to subsidise shortfall in maintenance costs from general revenue. A new raft of legislation was recently put through that increases the administration of Crown land reserves, and it requires council to have specialist staff available to manage these assets. But there was no additional revenue passed on to do this, so it has to be absorbed into what we already do, and it will come at the expense of something else that council should be doing. Just a slide on our integrated planning and reporting framework. So this is where we're required to plan under the Local Government Act. So the Act requires all councils to follow a consistent process for development of strategic plans and supporting plans. We have to maintain a 10-year community strategic plan, and then under this we have to maintain a 4-year delivery program and resourcing strategy. These documents cover 4 years to align with the council election cycle, and they're designed to be more specific than the strategic plan and set out the actions and resources needed to achieve the goals in the strategic plan. Every year, a 1-year operational plan and budget is prepared. The format of this plan is aligned to the activities in the delivery program. The idea of the process is that the goals set in the strategic plan flow through to the delivery program and then flow through to the operational plan and budget. A delivery program for the next 4 years will be developed when the new council is elected later this year, and asset management and financial strategy should be the key drivers of this planning process. Just a bit of background on the performance improvement order that we're operating under. So James has outlined some of this already, and as you are aware, we're under the performance and improvement order following suspension of the council, but we do have 7 returned councillors. The performance improvement order will remain in place until the elections in September, at which time our progress will be reviewed, and it's more than likely, I suppose, at that time, if we're satisfactory, that will be lifted and we'll continue on as before. The PIO is a public document. It is on Council's website. It contains a number of specific actions required to improve the council, including financial performance. How we're progressing under this is monitored by a financial controller, and he reports to the Minister for Local Government. The financial controller is an advisory role, but it does have broad powers under the Act. But we're still operating as a council the same way we always have. The council still receives reports and makes decisions as per normal, and the General Manager is responsible for managing council operations. The financial controller reviews and provides advice on key decisions that may have financial impacts, and he's therefore been involved in the process for the development of this draft operational plan and budget. It's important to recognise that both the Performance Improvement Order and the Financial Controller are in place to ensure Council complies with the Local Government Act and makes sustainable decisions in the best interest of the organisation. And as long as we do this, there will not be intervention from the Financial Controller. As such, the Council fully supports the PIO and the associated actions. It is viewed as a mechanism to help us get back on track and back to core services and values. The PIO covers a few areas that need improvement. Governance practices, property management and council finances are 3 key ones. And there's a requirement that these are also resourced. We're about 6 months into the implementation of these actions from the Performance Improvement Order, and we have been making good progress to date. I'm just going to cover off on the special rate variation. So as you may be aware, during the year, Council consulted the public on the need for an SRV because we had a temporary one that was expiring. So one of the options proposed was a higher SRV amount that would have provided additional asset renewal funding. However, this option wasn't supported by the community, and Council therefore voted to apply for an SRV that maintained funding from rate revenue at existing levels. We called this the maintained services scenario. This scenario will result in the current levels of service being maintained in the short term. We will see the asset renewal backlog increase under this scenario, and it provides limited options to fund new asset as the region grows. Council was successful in obtaining approval from IPART to continue with the temporary SRV on a permanent basis, and it therefore will be included in the rate base moving forward. The SRV will provide $1.5 million per year in funding for asset renewal. And on the slide there, you can see the proposed allocation of those funds in the 21-22 budget. I will just caution you that this is not the whole amount that we allocate towards these programs, but the SRV amount will provide a portion of that funding. We're required to report back against the SRV each year in our annual report. We have been doing so on the temporary SRV. One of the requirements is that Council improves its financial sustainability and manages the asset backlog in accordance with what we submitted to IPART. We have therefore set the 21-22 budget to be in line with the SRV application to IPART, in particular the allocation of funding towards asset renewal. Every year we have some budget challenges, and this year has been no different. So just running through a few of those, some of these have been impacting the Council for a number of years. COVID-19. So COVID-19 has continued to negatively impact Council revenues for the past couple of years, and it will continue to do so beyond 21-22. The 21-22 expected revenue loss is at least $1.2 million for airport revenues from COVID-19, and the total cumulative impacts from COVID-19 are estimated for this Council to be $3.6 million. This has reduced revenue from the airport, property leases and parking fines. So to offset these impacts, naturally we've had to reduce expenditure. In terms of flooding and storm damage, we've had extreme bushfire and subsequent flooding, which has had severe impacts on the condition of Kempsey Road, and it's resulted in significant natural disaster claims, and this is ongoing, and it will remain ongoing beyond 21-22. We're forecasting to spend in next year's budget around $15 million on natural disaster restoration works on Kempsey Road, and there's an additional $6.9 million on associated grant-funded works. While we do expect to recover most of these costs from the state government through natural disaster provisions, the size and complexity of the works program has required us to divert some of our specialised staff to support that program, and that means that they don't do other things within Council. Flooding events have also impacted roads and bridges in other areas of the region, and we're working through natural disaster claims for these impacts as well. In terms of drought, continues to impact the budget in 21-22, and basically in the form of reduced water consumption, and therefore revenues and some remaining costs related to groundwater infrastructure. Our ongoing severe drought conditions have negatively impacted Council's water fund by around $6.9 million, and they've necessitated Council to increase water consumption charges in 2021 due to the combined impact of the reduced revenue and higher costs. This was necessary to generate sufficient revenue to operate water services and also provide funding for water infrastructure. We're projecting that we will need to spend at least $84 million over the next 10 years just on water infrastructure alone. But this may increase above this if we take on additional projects such as the dam wall raising. Asset renewal remains a constant challenge, as you're probably already aware, but $157 million of Council's assets are either in satisfactory poor or very poor condition. The main asset classes affected are buildings, other structures and roads. Ongoing investment in asset renewal will help prevent deterioration of asset condition and avoids the need to spend significantly more in the future. We funded asset renewal in the budget to the level determined by Council's SRV application, but we've also identified through our budget process that we require an additional $6.2 million per year in roads funding in order to meet required service levels. We also require an additional $400,000 a year for building renewals. The funding levels for asset renewal that are set in the budget are what the community can afford. It's not the level of funding that's required to keep assets at a satisfactory condition over the long term. Fixed revenue and cost increases. So Council's predominantly relying on rates and charges revenue for funding, and that's a challenge for us because there's a need to balance the ability for ratepayers to absorb increases against the need for funding to maintain services. Generally speaking, all of our costs increase by CPI each year, but as you'd experience at home, there's some of our costs that increase above that. This year, an example is our insurance costs. At this point, we've been notified to expect an increase of 32%, or around $500,000 increase. We're also anticipating a 10% increase in electricity costs. To give you some context, the increase in rates from the rate peg is only expected to increase revenue by about $500,000. An issue for local government across the board is that the increase in revenue from rates is not able to keep up with rising costs. We're limited in what charges we can levy, and most of our fees and charges, such as, for example, planning and development, are fixed by the state government, and we have little control over them. It's not been all doom and gloom, but there's been a fair bit of good stuff that's been happening as well. No doubt there's some big challenges, but I do want to talk about this year's budget for a moment. We did start the 2021 financial year projecting a $2.3 million operating deficit. At our Q3 budget review for 2021, we had improved that to a $2.6 million operating surplus, and this is on a consolidated basis. It's a significant turnaround in 12 months. A key reason is grants, but it's also because of the huge amount of effort the Council has put into identifying savings and managing budgets. We've deleted or deferred a number of projects from the budget, and we've sourced grant funding where we can to undertake activities rather than funding them from rates or other revenues. We have taken an approach that expenditure outside of core service delivery must only be undertaken where it's necessary or critical. Council's cash position has also improved as a result. Our unrestricted cash is forecast to increase from a starting position of $3.1 million to $3.4 million. Unrestricted cash is important as it's Council's only buffer for unexpected events. Under the Performance Improvement Order, it's recommended that Council maintains an unrestricted cash level of $4 to $5 million. We are currently under this, but we are keeping this a focus of all of our budget review processes. We don't have the financial capacity to fix everything in 1 year, but we have established a foundation in order to do this over a number of years. So, as has been said, the staff and councillors will work closely together to produce the draft operational plan and budget. This is our plan for 21-22. It contains what Council's funded in the budget and what it intends to deliver. And it includes information on the estimated costs for each project and program and detailed budget information on Council's operations and capital works. It also includes an updated long-term financial plan covering 10 years. We do not intend to fund additional projects or services in 21-22 that are not in this plan. Variations to our program could occur where we're advised of grants, for example. However, we will prioritise delivery of the actions that are already in this plan over anything new. In terms of the strategy for the budget, I've already covered some of it. But just to give you an idea as to the process within Council, it began at the end of 2020 and it's been ongoing since then, so it takes quite a bit of time to get to this point. We've held 5 budget workshops with councillors over this period, and the Council's made some difficult decisions around what can be afforded and therefore included in the draft operational plan and budget. As part of a back to basics approach, we have removed almost $14 million in projects and service level funding that had been requested. This doesn't result in a reduction to any core services in 21-22, and we've had to ensure that the Performance Improvement Order and the associated actions are resourced. We've also had to ensure that what we presented to IPART is reflected in the budget. It's required strong discipline to ensure that there's no increase in service levels proposed, that our financial reserves are at least preserved, and funding is prioritised towards asset renewal. The 2021-22 budget position we've reached is balanced, and it ensures that we can afford the service levels that are proposed in the operational plan. However, it's a very lean budget, and it allows for nothing extra. There's no money available for anything other than what's been proposed. It will be important for this to be recognised by the community now and into the future, as the Council will have to continue this path and be run prudently with a back to core services approach from here. There simply will not be the money available to do anything else. Just a little background on Council's funds. We're required by the Act to account for and show the budget separately for each of these funds, which is Water, Sewerage and General Fund. We also produce a consolidated result. Assets and liabilities for each of these 3 funds are required to be accounted for separately, And in particular, we can only use the cash that's generated in each fund for those activities. All three funds are critical funds. They support underlying essential services. The general fund is the most difficult to adequately fund services in and resource because it contains everything council does apart from water and sewerage. We have to track the performance of each fund separately, and we also look at the ratios for each fund separately. This is because we cannot use the money from water and sewerage other than for these services, and each fund supports a distinct and separate base of assets. As I've said, a focus has been placed on rebuilding the organisation and getting back to basics. Key assumptions that will underpin our budget include that the rate peg will be 2%, the rate peg set by IPART. We'll include revenue as per forecasts. In most areas, we have increased the value of fees and charges and associated revenues. There are ongoing negative impacts from COVID-19 and natural disasters. Full-time equivalent staff remain as per merger numbers. We have included asset renewal funding as per the SRV scenario, maintain services, and we need to achieve an operating surplus in all three funds. And finally, we need to, at a minimum, preserve the general fund unrestricted cash position. So from that, we've developed the following budget position. So this is the draft operating result that's currently projected for 21-22, broken up by fund. So we have focused on trying to achieve what we can as far as possible. So this is in line with the community feedback received from the SRV consultation process, where the majority view is for council to continue to deliver existing services within current funding levels. It's only going to be possible with very tight financial controls in place and prioritising decision making to ensure that positive financial outcomes are achieved for council at all times. The 21-22 budget includes a consolidated operating surplus of $1 million, with an operating surplus projected for each fund. An operating surplus indicates the council can cover its operational costs, including depreciation expense. If an operating surplus is generated, council then may have the money to help pay down debt, fund new capital expenditure, for example, upgrades to assets, and also transfer money to cash reserves. These are all important areas for council. If council runs an operating deficit, it will not be able to do this, and it will not be able to fully fund asset renewal. So just a bit more information on total recurrent revenues. So recurrent is ongoing revenues, so revenues that we expect to receive each year. So the total budgeted for is $78 million, and you can see from the graph that the largest source of revenue is from rates and charges, so that's 47%. Annual charges are levied for the water, sewerage, waste and drainage. The next biggest source of revenue is from user charges and fees at 32%, and this category contains items like water user charges, revenue generated from state government roadworks and waste fees. Operating grants and contributions contribute 16%. This category includes the financial assistance grants, there's some road grants and a range of other grant funding sources. And other revenues contribute 4%. And in this category are a range of revenues, but they include fines and leases and so forth. Interest income contributes 1%. This has dropped substantially due to the economic impacts of COVID-19. In terms of our recurrent expenditure, so ongoing expenditure, we're forecasting in the budget $77 million. You can see from the graph on the screen that the largest component is employee costs at 33%. This is consistent with comparable councils. The next biggest source of expenditure is materials and contracts at 26%. This is a very broad category, and it includes a wide range of expenditure that we need to maintain assets and operate services. Other expenses is at 15%. This category includes costs like insurance, donations and contributions, and software licence fees. Borrowing costs is only the interest on loans, not the principal repayment, and that's 2%. And last but not least is depreciation. This is estimated to be $18.5 million in 21-22. Depreciation is the estimate of the decline in value associated with assets. It's an indication of the amount of money that should be invested in renewing assets on an annual basis. So this slide does show you the recurrent revenue slide as we just looked at, but this is the cash funding. So basically it shows where all of council's funding sources, both from recurrent revenue and other sources, is going to come from. And in 21-22, we expect to receive a total of $127 million through various sources. Recurrent revenue will contribute 62%. We also expect to receive 28% from capital grants. It's quite high. 8% will come from new borrowings proposed in the water fund. 1% will come from the sale of assets, which is the estimated value of vehicle and plant disposals. And 1% will come from cash reserves. So where does it go? So this slide is basically the opposite of the previous one and shows where the planned expenditure is. So recurrent expenditure will require about 46%. Capital expenditure will require 52%. And repayment of borrowings, so the principal component, will require 2%. So moving through to our draft capital budget position, it includes $65 million worth of projects, and out of this around $30 million relates to asset renewal, which includes the water and sewage funds. You'll recall that the previous slide showed depreciation at $18.5 million, so we are well short on funding asset renewal to the required level. The rest of the proposed capital expenditure mainly relates to new projects, and out of this program, $40 million is grant funded. We're experiencing an unusual high level of grants. Most of the grants we've received are for the construction of new assets, and while this is good in that it'll help council improve community assets and there'll be community benefits that flow from that, it will also increase depreciation expense, and we'll need to ensure that that is funded. We're going to jump through into a bit of a review on some of the individual projects. So Mark Byrne, our Manager of Utilities, will describe some of these to you now.
So there's three projects up here. The first one there, Puddlelock Water Main and Pump Station Upgrade. So a couple of years ago it was recognised that for Armidale secure water, Armidale Regional Council's secure water yield, we're required to upgrade the pipe size to deliver water from Puddlelock Dam to be utilised wholly by itself. At the moment we could only use it in partnership with Malpas Pipeline. So that project was initially designed, and it's 50% funded through Safe and Secure Water Program through the state government. That project now is almost finished design phase. The design should be finished at the end of June, and we'll be going to tender for construction to start hopefully September, with construction completed by March in 2022. The other project there is Generic Dam Wall. Generic Dam Wall was recognised as a high-risk dam wall being constructed back in 1896. There was a high risk of the dam failing and flooding the town. From that there was proposals put to the community to remove the dam wall completely, lower the dam wall or keep the dam wall at its current height. The community chose to keep it at the current height. So that project is worth roughly $8.1 million, which is half funded by the state government as well. At this stage, construction started on the project in February. As you can see below the dam there in the photo, there was an access road built. The site's been isolated. At this stage, the crest of the dam wall's been cut out, and there'll be 60 pre-tension bars drilled into the dam wall to stabilise. So there's 31 bars being drilled horizontally down through the crest of the wall, and then there's 29 drilled into the toe of the dam. That project is just hitting a critical phase where they start drilling, and the drilling needs to be dead straight down through the dam wall, or it has to be re-drilled. So it's quite a critical stage of the project. That construction project should be completed by the end of this year, by the end of December. The other project there is for a baler and a sorting plant at the waste management facility at Long Swap Road, and a second weighbridge. So the baling facility is in conjunction with regional landfill. So the baling facility is to sort commercial waste and all the other waste that comes into the waste management facility. So it's sorted into recyclables so that only minimum inert waste is being compacted and taken to regional landfill. That way we'll save on space in the new landfill, and that will extend the life of that landfill. So we might get an extra year or two out of each cell, which could extend the life of the landfill by another 10 years. The weighbridge, there's only one weighbridge there at the moment. So at the moment, traffic flows in and it has to come back the wrong way over the weighbridge to weigh out. This is a pretty unsafe practice, and it's also, you're not really getting a good quality of measurement of what waste you're getting in and out of the facility. So a second weighbridge on the exit lane at the waste management facility will increase the accuracy of what waste costs and waste tracking, and there'll be an update to the software with those weighbridges in that project as well. That project, hopefully, we're looking at trying to complete that project by early 2022. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So we've got a few other projects to give you a bit of information on tonight as well. So I'd just like to ask our Manager of Roads and Parks, Ben Smith, to come up and just cover off on bridge replacement and a bit on the roads program for next year.
Thanks, Kelly. I'll just go through the 5 bridges that we've got on the bridge replacement program for this year, and they are Martin's Gully Bridge. That project's 750 grand. It's jointly funded under the Bridge Renewal Program Round 5 and Roads to Recovery. And the scope there is to replace the existing bridge with a 2-lane concrete bridge with a minimum 44-tonne load capacity. The project's required to restore and maintain the load capacity to meet current and future traffic volumes. The current status of this project is that Tobco has been engaged as the design and construct contractor, and the design phase is currently underway. The design is to be complete early in the new financial year, with construction anticipated to be complete in December of this calendar year. The next project is Laura Creek Bridge. So that one's fully funded by the Fixing Country Bridges program to 638 grand. So the scope there is to improve the existing timber bridge and causeway to minimise the flood effect. The current status of that is the design phase is underway. The design is to be complete early in 2022, with construction anticipated to be complete by December 2022. The next project is the Lambs Valley Bridge to the tune of 440 grand. It's fully funded by the Fixing Country Bridges program. The scope there is to replace the existing timber bridge with a 2-lane culvert. The design phase is currently underway, and design is to be completed in October of this calendar year by our internal staff. The next project is Borrolong Creek Bridge on Borrolong Road. So that one's cracked the $1 million mark. That's $1.2 million. It's fully funded by the Fixing Country Bridges program. So that's to replace the existing timber bridge with a concrete bridge. So we'll have to do concept designs for a single lane and dual lane for that, with the final decision to be based on estimates and the availability of the funding. The current status is the condition of the funding to go for joint procurement with Glen Innes and Inverell Shire under a memorandum of understanding. So the design for that one will be completed in April of 2022, and construction anticipated to be complete in April 2023. The last of the bridges in the Bridge Renewal Program is the Bakers Creek Bridge on Old Hillgrove Road. So that one's $1.32 million. It's fully funded under Fixing Country Bridges. The scope there is to replace the existing timber bridge with a concrete bridge. It's very similar to the one on Borrolong Creek Bridge, the Borrolong Creek Bridge on Borrolong Road. So you can skip along. Oh, I've got the control. That one. Thanks. So as you can see there, for all of the other assets that aren't bridges, we've got the maintenance figures there, and the renewal figure. Excuse me. All of this information the prioritisation for these the projects under these asset areas there. It comes from the 10-year forward works program, and those are categorised, ranked from 1 to 10. And I'm happy to take questions on each of those projects at the end of this presentation. We also have a lot of renewal that's coming through grant funding, either it be the LRCI or Roads to Recovery, and the remainder is funded out of the general fund. Yeah, as I said, I'm happy to go over these projects at the end of the session. So,
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for your patience, everyone. There's not too much more to move through. So this table shows how we're projected to track on key financial ratios at the consolidated level. So it's basically our performance against the key performance ratios required under Fit for the Future. The operating performance ratio is particularly important. So a positive ratio means that you're projecting an operating surplus, and a negative ratio means that you're projecting an operating deficit. In 2021-22, we're budgeting for this to be 1.3%. This is over the benchmark of greater than 0%. And it represents a positive trend from the last few years, because we have previously forecast an operating deficit at the original budget stage, but not always for every fund. The own source revenue ratio is below the benchmark of greater than 60%, but this is due to grants being unusually high, and we don't expect this to continue beyond 21-22, so we expect that our indicator will move above the benchmark again in future. The building and infrastructure renewal ratio is forecast to improve at 83%. This is showing improvement, but it should be at or above 100%. This indicates that we're not directing enough funding to asset renewal because it uses depreciation as the comparison. The infrastructure backlog ratio is currently estimated at 2%, which is in line with the benchmark of less than 2%, but it is forecasting a downward trend, so it has been better than this, and it's forecast to increase above this over time. The asset maintenance ratio is the estimate of how much council should be spending on maintenance of assets to keep them at satisfactory condition. And so council estimates that it's currently spending around 89% of what is required. The debt service cover ratio indicates the level of cash that's available to service loan repayments. The benchmark is greater than 2 times, and council is above this. However, decisions to borrow also need to take into account what the borrowings are proposed for and other demands on cash. And the reason for this is, while borrowing may provide a cash injection in year 1, you've got to then meet the repayments, and you need to have the available cash in future years in order to do this. The unrestricted current ratio measures how many months council can continue to pay its immediate expenses without additional cash flow. This excludes cash that is restricted, such as the water and sewerage reserves, and council is currently below the benchmark of 1.5 times due to low unrestricted cash. While some financial ratios are showing improvement, this is coming at the cost of other ratios, the key infrastructure ratios, and this is because council doesn't have a sufficient level of funding to deliver the required levels of service, both from an asset maintenance and renewal perspective. In adopting the 21-22 budget, a total of $1.2 million in funding requested to meet the required maintenance service levels in roads and parks was left out of the budget because we didn't have the ability to fund it. To meet renewal and rehabilitation service levels in council's road strategy would require an additional $6.2 million per year that's currently not funded. These impacts are reflected in the performance of the infrastructure backlog ratio, which for the general fund doubles within 10 years based on current projections and exceeds the benchmark of less than 2%. Council's asset maintenance ratio is also below the benchmark of 100%. This graph shows the projected performance of the building and infrastructure renewals ratio over the next 10 years for each fund. And as you can see, the ratio for general fund is well below the benchmark of 100% or higher. So it's the purple item on the graph. It's forecast to average 58% over the next 10 years. Council's ratios aren't able to be improved without additional funding or significant reprioritisation of existing funding. There's a large asset base valued at over $1 billion in infrastructure, and the projection for the key ratios for infrastructure are currently at unacceptable levels. Short-term funding strategies are limited by the poor cash position, with the ability to take out borrowings limited. We face several years of strict financial controls needing to be in place, and the need to make some hard decisions on how funding is currently being prioritised in order to improve this. This is why Council has framed the draft 21-22 budget around a back-to-basics approach, with an improvement in projected operating results across all funds and increased funding prioritised towards asset renewal. We've not been able to incorporate some of the longer-term financial improvement strategies that will be required yet. However, the draft 21-22 budget establishes the starting point from which further improvement can be made. That ends the section on the budget document itself, but I do have some information on proposed rates, fees and charges. Just for your information, a copy of the front page of the draft revenue policy is on the screen there. So this document was adopted as part of the draft budget and operational plan pack. This includes the information on rates, annual charges and water consumption charges. It also includes this year, which is new, the proposed rates harmonisation path. We also have a separate fees and charges document, so any other fees and charges outside of what's contained in the revenue policy are included in this document. So you'll typically find things like waste landfill fees, entry fees to the swimming pool, those sorts of things. This will also be adopted with the final budget at the end of June. So something that's new this year, rates harmonisation. It's not a new topic, but it is new in terms of its impact on the revenue policy. So up until this point, merged councils have been required to preserve the pre-merger rating structures by the New South Wales Government. So that was known as a rates freeze. The rates freeze is now at an end. So from the 1st of July, we are required by the New South Wales Government to harmonise rating structures. Rates harmonisation, and harmonisation is not a council term, it's a term that's used by New South Wales Government for this process, is where council will move to a single rating system that uses the same method to calculate rates. Different rating categories and subcategories will still be in place, but we have to ensure that the new rating system that we eventually move to complies with the Local Government Act. To reduce the impact of the change on individual ratepayers, the New South Wales Government has introduced new legislation very recently to allow council to do this over a longer time frame. And this council has elected to harmonise rates over 4 years. There'll be no increase in the total rates collected by council due to rates harmonisation. It doesn't affect annual charges, and we're conducting community consultation on the proposed rates harmonisation framework, which is outlined in the revenue policy in conjunction with this consultation process on the operational plan and budget. So in other words, we're seeking feedback on the proposed rates harmonisation implementation framework as well as the budget and operational plan. So on the screen, I've just got what the current rating structure looks like, which is on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side is what it will look like after 4 years when the rating structures are fully harmonised. As you can see, the larger changes are the amalgamation of rating categories. So within the residential section, the proposal is to amalgamate the rural residential and village categories into one category. We will still have an Armidale and Guyra residential category. For farmland, the major change there is that Armidale and Guyra farmland will move into one farmland category. There will still be an intensive farmland category. And for business, similarly as residential, it's the amalgamation of the rural residential, which we call non-urban, into, well, not residential for business, but that area, into one category with villages. But there'll still be a separate Armidale and Guyra rating category for the business as well. And there'll be no change to mining. So within the revenue policy document, and as required by the legislation, we've outlined what the average impact of the rates harmonisation path will look like. So this slide shows the predicted impact on the former Guyra Shire Council ratepayers over 4 years. The figures that are on the screen do include the predicted rate peg. So obviously for 21-22, that's 2%. And we've used 2.5% for future years on recommendation by IPART, but obviously that rate peg will be determined at the time. We've also shown in this slide what the average rates paid for each category are, so you can see what type of dollar change is likely to occur as well as percentages. We haven't shown any information here in relation to any other charges that may be paid, so this is just the ordinary rates, so it doesn't affect areas like wastewater or sewerage. As you can see from this slide, the main impacted ratepayers from a percentage and dollar perspective are farmland ratepayers in the former Guyra region, and this is because, as I mentioned, the farmland will be merged into one category over 4 years. There's also some smaller impacts to some of the other categories, and in some of them, while the percentages may look reasonably high, the actual average rates paid in that category are usually a little bit lower. You will see probably some impacts, though, also within the non-urban component where the rural residential and villages are being amalgamated. The main reason for the farmland impacts, we did cover off some of this in the consultation with the special rate variation. But essentially what's happened is the farmland land values in Guyra, in the former Guyra and former Armidale region, are fairly similar, about $1 billion in rateable land value. However, the former Armidale region is raising about $2.9 million from that land value, and the former Guyra region was raising about $1.9 million. So obviously when you bring those together, it shifts the rate burden from Armidale through to Guyra as part of that process. So this graph, a little bit more extensive because there's more categories in the former Armidale area, but it shows the similar impacts over a 4-year period. As I mentioned, the main impacts are where we're no longer able to retain 2 or more categories and we're combining them into one. It's applicable to farmland but also affects some of the villages and rural res. As rates were higher in the former Armidale area, really generally speaking, than the former Guyra area, this has created a shift of rates from Armidale to Guyra in some of those categories. So where you're seeing the negative percentages, you'll notice in the Guyra analysis that there are similarly increased percentages on that side. We have created a document called Rates Harmonisation, What Would I Pay? So this will help provide an indication of what rates would be payable over the 4 years based on different valuation levels. That is available on our website. We've got some hard copies here as well. But it's just to give you an idea. If you know what your rating category is, you should be able to go and have a look at that and just see what the likely impact will be over that 4-year time frame. For annual charges, these are the main annual charges proposed for 21-22. There are a few others, smaller categories contained in the revenue policy. And as you can see from this slide, we're proposing to increase the water access charge by $50 to $300 next year. And we're also proposing to increase the sewer access charge to $500. The domestic waste collection charge is proposed to increase to $425. Rural waste management charges will be increased in line with a path that's previously been determined. So at this time there will still be different charges for former Armidale and Guyra areas. The Waterfall Way landfill levy will remain at $150. The Waterfall Way operation charge will increase to $70 from $65. And drainage charges are set by legislation, so they will remain at the same level. Other than the rural waste management charge, all of our annual charges now apply consistently to all ratepayers across the local government area. Water consumption charges. So we are proposing to keep the residential and commercial water consumption charges at the same level in 21-22 as they are in 2021. We're currently unable to reduce the level of consumption charges without negatively impacting water revenues and the water reserve. And given the projections for large amounts of expenditure required to renew assets in this area, it's critical that Council generates a sufficient level of funding to operate the service and maintain the reserve. Getting towards the last run here. So these documents were adopted by Council in draft at the meeting on the 26th of May, as you're probably aware. As James has said, they're on public exhibition till the 24th of June. We're encouraging the community to provide submissions on the content of these documents, and we will report the submissions back to Council along with the final budget recommendation at the meeting in June, late June. Where you can get some more information, we have a Your Say website on Council's website. That is where you can access any information that's on public exhibition. So the budget and operational plan information is there. It also includes the rates harmonisation, what would I pay information. These meetings are being live streamed tonight, and the GIRA meeting will be so as well. And so people can watch online, and the meetings will remain available via our YouTube site for your future reference. So having your say, how do you make a submission? Submission should be in writing, but you can post, email or hand them in, and obviously we'll accept those until the 24th of June. So thanks very much for listening. We will open the floor to questions and comments.
Well done, Kelly. Any questions, please? So people at home can hear.
Thanks. My question isn't exactly about the current budget, but about the projected increase in the dam wall size. I notice that there's been a big jump in the projected cost of water from 200 to 250, which is 20% increase. I'm just interested to know what impact the increase in the wall height is likely to have on those water costs for the community.
Kelly, Mike. No, you up to the mic.
Sorry, thanks, Alan. I'm not sure I exactly understood the question, but the spillway is going up 6.49 metres. In this year's coming budget, we've got a budget line item there for $500,000. I forget the exact words. Water security, I think, is the words. The total cost of that design work is $1 million. We were expecting to get 50% subsidy out of safe and secure water, which would bring that back to 500. So we're in a little bit of a tussle with the state government over that at the moment. Is that what you're referring to? Sorry.
Not exactly, and I'll just add another question on.
Yeah.
I just want to know what impact it will have on the costs for the community of water charges if the dam wall is raised.
Yep.
And I also was still under the impression that the secure water yield hadn't been kind of completed and released yet, but it sounds as though it has, and I'm wondering about that being visible to the public and whether that decision's, I saw in the paper or in the press release, I think that decision's clearly been made to raise the dam wall. I just want a bit clarification around that.
Pull me up if I miss something, but at the May meeting, the councillors resolved to go with the option of going up to that dam spillway, and we gave them in all that attachments that are up there on the council papers and the website quite an extensive body of work from Public Works Advisory and also New South Wales Water Services on our draft secure yield, and it gave an indicative, and I've really got to qualify myself here, of nearly $30 million, and as the Mayor keeps reminding us, the state government has given us a long-running commitment that would be fully funded by the state government. But I've really got to just re-emphasise, and I'd hate for anybody to leave the room thinking that that's a final figure. That's what we call a preliminary options figure. Then we move into the design, concept and design work and the business case and review of environmental factors and a range of things like that. So there's an awful lot of work to be done, and there's I think about a 35% contingency in there from memory. And as that work gets further down the track, those figures become more. You can have more confidence in them, and then the contingency falls. In terms of the impact on the cost, I guess one of the things Kelly's put up in the draft operational plans and budget is what we're expecting to do, even outside of the Malpas work. And outside of the Malpas work, we've got a bit over 28 million, and that's including some of the things that Mark was talking about: Turmeric Dam upgrade, puddle duct raw water. But there's many other water treatment plants. So that's part of our long-term capital works program, which informs our long-term financial plan, which informs where we need to be with our water fund or our water reserve, and that informs us then about the price that we need to charge per kilolitre, per kilolitre, and as you know, that's $4.20 now, and to maintain the water reserve and have the prospect of doing those jobs, that's where we've determined that price would sit at $4.20. So that does take account of our normal capital program, but not the Malpas, and that would be sometime down the track.
So just to clarify, it sounded as though you were saying the government would fully fund the increase in the wall height, therefore that cost wouldn't be passed on to the community. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, I've got to be careful here. As I say, we're talking 30 million, and we're talking what we hope the state government would do. And so I suppose, I'll leave that with the elected people to come to the conclusion where that's going to land. I'm sorry, the mayor's going to say something. I will just make the proviso comment that even if we got it all wrapped up in a bundle and all paid for, of course there's long-term cost of running that asset, depreciating that asset, and as our finance people keep reminding us every time we do a project, it doesn't come. We have to be very mindful of all those long-term costs, whole-of-life costs that will have an impact on our running, on our fees and charges.
Helen, I've had several discussions with Adam Marshall on this topic, and I've been given to understand from him on several occasions that the government will most likely find the full cost of the project. I've been out to the dam site with him and also with Minister for Water Pavey, and that was reiterated by both of them on that occasion. So the ball's in our court to get the costings and the design to the government so that they can find the money for us.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And Helen, just going to your integrated cycle water management strategy question as well, that document definitely has not been completed as yet. As we said back in March when we spoke about it, I think with Anne and the crew, you'll certainly be made aware when that document's available and have an opportunity to peruse it. So most certainly. And Mark's saying towards the end of the month there should be a draft available.
So towards the end of the month that should be available to us?
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah, I think the concern is that it's been about 2 years since that document was requested, and a number of, I suppose, the things in the budget in relation to the water are based upon, Scott, you've often mentioned, I guess you've heard some indications about what's in that report, but none of us have got any indication of what that is, and I think that's around different water levels, different rain levels, variations, and so on, and so climate change, etc. And so decisions are being made in this budget on that basis, or that's what you have stated. One of the ones in particular being the bores, and that change from utilising the bores as only for emergency to putting them in as normal use, which is not supported, I definitely think, by a number of people in Gara, and not supported by the climate action with respect to the fact that we have not got the information that you have told us you're basing this on for us to make a judgment, number one, and so and two, we're in a financial situation where there is, there's money shouldn't be spent until you should spend it, and that's a lot of money allocated to that particular project. So I think that's just from that.
It's up to you, John. I think if you get some time and you get a dose of insomnia, I would go to the council website and look at those that Malpas Dam report by Mark and the team, and the information and the attachments behind that give you, as you say, we're not quite there, but there is a lot of body of information, particularly around the secure yield, and there's a few models of what that might look like, and it gives you a 30-year projection of where Public Works Advisory and Water New South Wales think we're going to be, and it puts in there also parts of that modelling, the climate change, and then it identifies that gap in 30 years' time, even if we do Malpas and we do many other things, that we will still have that gap of, from memory, a bit over 1,500 megalitres. So we're, I guess, by the scientists, we've been told pretty clearly that even with the infrastructure we've got and the infrastructure we're planning to do, we're still going to have that gap in 30 years' time under that climate change scenario and the demand levels that they've identified. And they do identify about 3 levels from memory. So I think it's reasonable for this council to, and they made the decision that, to look at that option study, go down the path of that recommendation, number 3, raise the spillway, but we still have a job in front of us in meeting our long-term 30-odd year task resource for this community in Guyra and Armidale. But I appreciate your point. It is still a work in progress for us. And I would say we will have an IWCM in about a month or so, and remember that cuts across sewer, it cuts across all our water infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure.
Scott, just while you've got the microphone, I don't need it next stage. You talk about one really important thing is that it's great if the state government do fully fund the extension of the wall, but you mentioned a worrying word, tussle. You're having a tussle with the state government over $500,000. So the design plans, have they started yet? Is this tussle winnable? Is it like a sort of
I've ventured into territory I shouldn't be in, so I might just give that back. We've had conversations with DPIE Water for quite a period of time, and I'm talking about before my time, years leading up to this point. And there's been an indication all along that we would get, when we got to this point, which is now after the option study, moving into the design phase, that we would get 50% under safe and secure water funding. No one's landed on a decision, so I should just be careful what I say. But the little bit of pushback we're getting is all across the state now, and we're regarded as one of the highest priorities. But we're being told by DPIE Water that there are other parts of the state that quite high priority for reasons of economic hardship and things like that. So I don't know what's exactly changed, and all I could probably do is say to you, between general managers and councillors, there will be conversations with our local member, and I'll leave it at that.
So just in relation to staffing, so you said 296 full-time staff, is that right? And does that mean that, because there has been indications that you are currently understaffed or will be employing more staff, so, and that, there's not a lot of capacity, people are working across different jobs and so on. So is there a little bit of clarification on that?
Yeah, so that's definitely the case. So we budget for a certain number of employees each year. But obviously over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been carrying quite a number of vacancies. We actually do recognise in our forecasting, as most councils do, a level of savings as a result of positions becoming vacant and not being filled straight away. But our vacancy factor has probably been running at about 25 or 26 positions reasonably consistently. The general managers obviously commenced a program to recruit critical positions that have been vacant for a little while. So slowly that vacancy factor will be filled, and that issue that you're alluding to about people working across different areas will be mitigated to a large degree through that process. But we do budget for a level of staffing. However, at any point in time, obviously we may not have every position filled within council because people, leave all the time and that sort of thing.
Kelly, couple of questions, if you don't mind. One, you mentioned there's a big increase in grants at the moment. Could you give us, the room, the reason as to why that's the case? And the other question is, with the harmonisation, I think you mentioned that's going to come in over 4 years. Is that in GIRA? So will that just be, so they won't pay the full amount in the first year? It'll be, am I interpreting that correctly?
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, so in relation to the first question on grants, it's an unusual time in local government. I've never seen it before, but there's been quite a lot of stimulus money put out by state and federal government in response to COVID and drought, flooding. So we've been the lucky recipients of a wide range of funding, and there's been also a lot of competitive grant fund rounds that have gone out that we've been successful in as well. I suppose some of the areas that are also increasing that level is natural disaster recovery, because that comes by way of a grant, even though that program exists all the time, and if you have a natural disaster you can access that program. The couple of other areas that's making 21-22 a particularly high year is within the water and sewerage area, or the water services area. So there's a couple of projects there that are 50% grant funded, being the Puddle pipeline replacement and the Demeric Dam. And so they're quite significant grants, so they've been obviously recognised in those projections as well. The harmonisation impact, so we consulted on that through the special rate variation process that we ran late last year. So we did 2 sections within that consultation process. One was on rates harmonisation and one was on the SRV. With the harmonisation section, we were talking to the community at that time at full harmonisation at 1 July, because under the Act at that time that's what we had to do. The revised legislation that was passed in May, so very recent, originally had proposed a maximum 4-year time frame. They have gone to 8, but council's elected to remain with the 4-year path that it originally modelled and determined. The reason for that being, by the time another 4 years has gone past, it's 13 years beyond. If we had gone with 8 years, it would be 13 years past merger before everything's actually brought together. So it seemed 4 years would be more appropriate, and the rating impacts that are forecast out through that process probably aren't too severe to indicate that we should take it any longer. But what it does mean is that, yes, it'll be a slower implementation. So GIRAs, if their rates coming up, they'll come up much more slowly than what was originally proposed, and any reduction in Armidale rates will come down on a more slow time frame than what was originally proposed.
So that should be relatively happy. Find out more or not. You're saying have some complaints from the stream, if you could use a mic when you've got a
Yeah, just for anyone who might have been aware of the meeting tomorrow night, we have postponed that meeting to next week. We plan to have the meeting, but obviously with the weather forecast, we thought it was appropriate probably at this point to defer that to a time that might be a bit more safer to travel in. Obviously with rating, you can't do anything without creating impacts. So whatever you do to improve one position, you're going to make another position worse off, and unfortunately this process will do that also.
Just got another comment. Thank you for your presentation, Kelly. That was really good to see what's happening, and thanks for the work that's gone into preparing the budget. I guess I'm speaking in the context of Council unanimously declaring, as was appropriate, a climate emergency in 2019, and there are things happening that are consistent actions towards that. But I think that still the wording in the documents that are being put out by Council doesn't reflect that. You mentioned storms and flood and fire and things coming up like, we get these incidental things. There's clear evidence that things are changing, that will have effects on council assets and costs of maintenance and forward planning and all those things. And I really feel strongly that these should be reflected in the wording of the documents that we're putting out, in particular the budget, because it certainly will have budgetary impacts, and we need to be putting funding into trying to ameliorate those things. Thank you.
Questions? Luke?
Kelly, I reiterate what Helen said. Thank you very much for tonight's presentation. If I understand this correctly, there are 12 departments in council. Is that correct?
There is, I suppose to explain the structure in council, the adopted structure is that there'll be 3 directorates under the General Manager.
Okay.
Yeah, so probably the level that you're talking about would be more the level under the directors.
Okay.
So there is approximately 12. I'm just not sure whether it's 12 or 14, to be honest. I'd have to go back and have a look at the breakdown of our budget in that respect.
Taking that into account, the figures that you've put up tonight, how are they traced back through the different directorates? Who is held responsible for the figures? Should there be overruns? And what happens in that process?
I'm glad you asked that question. So in the 21-22 budget and operational plan, unfortunately our corporate planning officer is not here, but hopefully she's watching at home because she'll be glad that that question actually came up. So one of the things that we have done in this year's operational plan is we've previously included estimates for projects and programs, but what you will see is that we have estimates on all the projects and programs that are considered to be once-off initiatives. And then we've also got references to project numbers in relation to our business as usual. While we don't have estimates against those individually through the document, at the back of the document there is a list of all of our project budgets, our revenue and our expenditure estimates that we've forecast, and that all reconciles back to the final operating result that Council is adopting. How that is managed internally, within Council we utilise budgeting tools, so we have all of the budgets assigned to the individual responsible officers. That is set at manager level, and then obviously the directors are accountable for the managers within their portfolios. Every manager has their budgets pulled together in our software system, in a budget pack is what we call it, and they have to go through that regularly to determine whether they have savings within their budgets that they can identify, whether there's potential overspends and how they're tracking. We do a formal review every quarter. It probably seems at this point no longer have we finished the quarterly review before we start the next one, even though it's 3 months apart. There's a lot of work involved. And through that process, we have people from the finance team, one of them's here tonight, who goes through that in a lot of detail and makes sure that all the information that we're getting from the different managers and other people in the business can be validated, that it's accurate, and that we haven't got any problems that might be on the horizon. The managers are expected to manage all their budgets down to line item level, so it's quite a low level of detail. And we also have a tracking system in terms of whatever the committed costs are, so what your actual costs are, what your commitments might be, where you're projecting to be at this point in time in terms of your overall committed spend. The system works pretty well. We have obviously had a much more intense focus on that review process this year, being under the performance improvement order and having to make some improvements in the Council's financial position. And it is paying dividends. What we are finding is we are making a lot of gains through that process, but we've also found a lot of areas where our actual results haven't performed as well as what we thought. And the big one that comes to mind is really the airport revenues. So we just haven't had the revenues coming through because of COVID. And we originally forecast this year based on a very conservative position, but it's even been worse than that. So through that process, we keep a very good track of where we plan to be at the end of June. And obviously, we rely on the managers to do their bit, but we also have some checking mechanisms in place to make sure that that's happening.
Thank you. One other question. Looking back on Armidale's history, there have been some major overruns in prices. Your feelings are that this new process that you've set in place is going to mitigate that?
It's probably better known by a death by 1,000 cuts. So obviously monitoring the budget is one thing, but often that's the after the fact. So you've spent the money or you've committed the money. So in terms of trying to avoid project overruns, really that comes down to good project planning. So the organisation has put better systems in place in order to manage that a lot more proactively, I guess you would say, so that we're not getting to the point where we've actually gone out to tender and we've committed to a contract and then had a situation where the project might exceed budget at that point. So there's a lot more time, effort, money put into the pre-planning process around projects now. One of the things that is in next year's operational plan and budget, you'll see it in the capital works listing, is a specific allocation for capital project planning, because what you're talking about, generally speaking, happens in the capital area. So within that area, we have an allocation next year of around $400,000. That is specifically around getting the designs and plans in place for projects to be shovel ready. And either they'll be projects that we undertake through existing grants, or we'll look for new grants in terms of some of those projects moving forward. But most of the time when we want to go for those opportunities, we have to have a project that's costed, we know how long it's going to take, and we have to be ready to really commence construction as soon as we get the grant. So that's what that's for. I mean, there's a lot of other things happening in that space. Happy for you to elaborate on that, James, but I do know that it's one of our areas that we have spent a lot of time on trying to improve.
Yeah, I'd just go on further to say that historically what we've done here and what a lot of councils do is that you find a situation where you're gifted a sum of money and then all of a sudden you start retrofitting and trying to come up with a project that will meet the time frames and the guidelines, and then you haven't designed it, you haven't costed it, you think it's going to be a $3 million project, you've only got $1 million to spend. So, and then you end up either trying to save yourself the embarrassment of going back to the community or under delivering, so you raid some other part of the organisation, or you just go out and blow your budget, and like we've done previously. So as Kelly was saying, we've got a real focus around project management now and really starting to improve that dynamic across the council, making sure that we plan, scope, design, cost our projects out. They are shovel ready, but we're adding another component to that. We've just done that recently around communications and engagement plans as well. So making sure even if it's a year away, we understand in draft form who our target market are, who the people we need to get out and talk to, and make sure that they're aware of those sorts of things. So it's a bit of a work in progress, but we are trying to work really hard on that because we can't afford to have any blowouts. So, and we've got a significant number of projects that, as you've seen tonight, that we need to get through, and we don't have any spare money. So if we can't do it for the budget that we've got, then we're in all sorts of trouble with the funding body. So if we can't do it, we're sort of saying no, and sort of living within our means is the most important thing we can do at the moment.
Are outside consultants still being brought in a lot?
As required, yeah. I mean, where we don't have the capacity or the capability and capacity, or we don't have the staff numbers to be able to do the work physically on the ground, then we will bring in external firms to help us out. The Kempsey Road's probably a really good example of that. Our workforce, the bulk of our roads workforce are out on Waterfall Way doing the work out there, and we don't have a lot of spare capacity to be able to get out and so head out to Kempsey Road. So yeah, where we need to, we do, but we are working really hard to build that capability and capacity within this organisation so we can start to take on more of those works. That money then circulates around the local economy a lot better, and then we can slowly start to grow our staffing numbers as well. That'll be the longer term objective.
And sorry, very last question. Sorry. I'll just check. Lost it. I'll come back.
Oh, that's probably for Kelly. Is it Kelly? Just with respect to, could you take us through, obviously next or in September we'll have a new council, there'll be a new community strategic plan, and it's a time of reinvigoration, we would hope, and then there's another budget. So could you just explain how all of those processes will be combined, like come together? What's your vision for that for next year?
Yeah, well, within 12 months of the new council being elected, there'll need to be, or maybe might be 9 months actually, but there'll need to be a new community strategic plan worked on and adopted by that council. So we'd be looking to start that work as quickly as we possibly could after the council elections on the 4th of September. We may even get an opportunity to start that a little bit earlier, at least the groundwork and starting to get that ready for the new council. As far as this particular budget, if it's adopted on the 29th of June, will be the budget for the incoming council. Of course, that council has those opportunities to be able to, as part of the quarterly review, to make changes and alterations as they may see fit. But obviously, we would hope that anything that's done in that space would be done assuming that we still maintain a sustainable budget and head the way we're heading. We've got a lot of work to do in order to be able to get ourselves over the line. I think the position that this council has taken has been one that they wanted to provide a nice sort of foundational, sustainable budget that the new council would be able to inherit, and then it would be over to the new council. But I would suggest for anybody that is thinking about running for council to know that we've got a couple of really difficult years ahead of us. Not unsalvageable, but nonetheless there has to be a pretty strong discipline to get us through the next probably 2 years at least, 2 budget cycles, and then we can probably start thinking a little bit more grandiose or beyond back to basics. But certainly there'll be a new budget. We'll start the budget process probably around December, January next year with the new council. Later this year with the new council. And then go through that cycle of budget sessions with the council and the session that we're on to tonight, and then the final adoption of one for 22-23.
Kelly, just further to the exceptional situation with grant funding at the moment, so that'll change, and you indicated that'll decrease in going into the future. So how do you actually design your budgets around knowing or not knowing what grant funding will be available?
It's a good question because nothing's guaranteed in the grants world. We assume that we will continue to receive grants like financial assistance grants and roads for recovery, even though the reality is that there isn't guarantees that we will forever get that source of funding. Probably the area where we can't make too many assumptions around is the one-off grants that we have a lot of at the moment. Within the areas like water and sewerage, we've got a bit more information about what kind of projects we might be able to apply for funding for, because there's always a level of funding available for those sorts of things. But with a lot of the roads funding and those sorts of things, a lot of those grants are just announced every year. We don't have certainty, so we really have to plan where we don't have certainty on trying to fund what we can to the level that we can without grants. And if grants come along, fantastic, it's a bonus. And then we can add additional expenditure to our program on the back of that. But it's very difficult to know what state and federal governments will be offering in future. And so we're sort of planning probably only maybe 2 years ahead in terms of the grant space for competitive grants.
I'd also just perhaps add to that and say that if you're on your game as an organisation, or in our case, Armidale Regional Council, if we're on our game, we've got a significant number of projects that we've planned well ahead. We've got a suite of projects, anything from your $10,000 projects up to your $1 million, $10 million projects. So we know that we're going to regularly, building better regions from the feds is an annual fund usually. We know growing local economies, stronger country communities at the state level are often funding. So as soon as we can get ahead of the curve and start to plan out our forward works program, makes it very easy for us to be able to make multiple grant applications and take advantage of that. So we're in a little bit of a rut, I think, now. We've just got to get, because we're a bit behind the 8 ball, but we've just got to get in front of that and have a couple of years of consolidation, and then we'll start to see some good movement forward from there.
Sorry, the question I sort of got mixed up with comes from Richard Makem, who's the chairman of ARA. He wants to know, with you being the experts, which you have shown tonight, what would the council's accountants do for the community so that they can make more sense of budget information and clarity of the overall message that you're delivering for this year? if I can liken it perhaps to studying a university subject and then taking it down to a year 3 class and telling them what's going on.
Yeah, we've got some, I think this year it would be fair to say, given where we're at, you probably can't get any simpler than back to basics, Lou. But that said, yeah, I think the way we present the information, I think absolutely we could probably make it a lot simpler. These guys think I'm joking when I say I'm a pictures guy. I love pictures. That's how I kind of think, and I really do. I don't like reading if I can get away with it. So so we're gonna look at ways and means of how we can sort of simplify that message and put it out. And probably I don't think the full media release actually got printed for the local paper, but the one that was actually put together tried to draw parallels to household budgets in terms of council budgets and fixing roofs and putting money aside. And I thought it was a really good simplified example of how we're trying to operate versus is not any different to how a household would normally operate in terms of what you can and can't do. But yeah, we certainly take that on board. I think in future years we'll look to have more pictures and try to simplify that language. Even the key direction ratio, the performance ratios, not many people will understand what an operating performance ratio is, but we'll try and find terminology that makes it a little bit simpler for people to understand, and they can kind of reconcile that in their head.
Just one comment to add on to that. One thing I have noticed with the budget reports over the years is that the diagrams that come out, that are the simple pictures, they're not consistent. Therefore, you can't compare them from one year to the other. They kind of have different information, and that's kind of, it just makes it more difficult. So if you are able to get some consistency, maybe this one's the same last year's, I'm not sure yet, I think that, it's good to be able to compare it between years. Thank you.
Can I just say that's an excellent point? And I just need to correct the General Manager. If he thinks that we're starting next year's budget at the end of the year, he's dreaming. It'll be more like 1st of July.
Well, that's when I'll be starting. I'll come in later in the year. Any further questions from anyone? And it was remiss of me, there was a couple of other of our staff colleagues here tonight that I didn't acknowledge, Steve, Mel and Brad, too, here, who have been instrumental in putting all of this together. So a big thank you to them. Helen, did you have another question? No, you're all right. All good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if there's nothing else, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it. I thought those questions were really good, actually, and I think that was a good Q&A session. So thank you once again for being here. Safe travels home, and thank you to the staff and the councillors for being here tonight too. Thank you.